Hello and welcome to The Week That Really Was with John McGurk and Sarah Ryan for this week ending the 7th of February 2025. I will begin by noting that this week it is not The Week That Really Was with John McGurk and Sarah Ryan because Sarah has had a bereavement. Her father-in-law sadly passed away this week, and in the circumstances, obviously, she can't be with us. And just on behalf of everybody here at Gript Media, I want to extend our deepest condolences to Sarah, Keith, their children, and indeed the extended Redmond and Ryan families on their bereavement. And we look forward to having Sarah back with us next week. Never fear, however, we do have a more than capable replacement. I am joined by one of my favourite columnists at Gript Media, somebody who is an eminent barrister. She's also the founder of the Conservative Woman website in the UK, where she used to live. She now lives on the east coast of the country, safely inside the Pale with her husband and children. She is, of course, the wonderful Miss Laura Perrins. Laura, thank you very much for filling in at short notice. How are you?
I'm fine.
That's good. So this is called The Week That Really Was. So I guess I should start by asking you what the highlight of your week was.
My week was fine. It was kind of quiet enough. It was cold, of course, at the end of it. And yeah, it was fine. Obviously, with a busy news cycle, so there's plenty to follow on that. Yeah, it's hard to keep up with the Orange Man.
Yeah, well, let's start with that, because I mean, it really just has been the week of Trump. He's been unleashing chaos everywhere. He's been today. My wife came home today. She looked at the television, and he was on television, and she said, "Is he ever off the TV?" And I said, "No, honey, this is just what the next 200 weeks is going to be. He's going to be that man on television saying things and doing things." In this week alone, Laura, he has abolished the old transgenders in women's sport. He's gotten rid of USAID. He seems to have launched Elon Musk into the bureaucracy of the United States with like an axe to just cut things left, right, and center. He has proposed the annexation of Gaza and turning it into kind of like a new Las Vegas on the Mediterranean, and suggested that all those people should be moved somewhere else so he can build casinos. And I mean, it's just general chaos. But I'm loving it. I have to say, people who watch this podcast regularly know that I'm a dreadful sort of Trump-hating skeptic, but I'm loving it this week. I think he's just unleashing the kind of chaos that the world needs.
Chaos is definitely the word. I mean, it is hard to keep up. He certainly has a lot of energy. I mean, this week was probably the highlight, or last night going into this week, because obviously he had a great photo op with all of the little girls and all the gymnasts and, you know, what looked like ice skaters signing that executive order, and he ushers them all around. So it was probably one of the greatest, you know, photo ops you've ever seen, courtesy given to him by the demented left. So, you know, everybody's pleased about this, apart from the usual sort of a couple of Japanese, you know, transgender people out on those islands, and also, of course, RT News. While most media outlets reported it as Trump bans men from women's sports, RT ran Trump order seeks to ban transgender women from girls from female sports, because this came on the heels of the US military, where they chose their words carefully on this RTE. So they started off with US President Donald Trump has signed a series of executive orders to remove diversity, equity, inclusion from the military. Reinstate the troops that were disgracefully expelled for refusing the vaccine. And then that sentence ends, and take aim at transgender troops, which is certainly an interesting phrase to use when you're talking about the military. Of course, you had a problem with them doing that, which puts you in there with RT and the rest of the Japanese soldiers who are in denial as to the reality.
Yeah, Ryan isn't enough. I've got somebody else kicking my ass now.
Yeah.
Can I explain? Can I explain what my position was on that?
Sure.
Before you fight with me on it? I mean, what my position on that was, and I wrote an article on this at the time, was that I often find that Donald Trump is a great man for using a hammer to crack a nut. So what my view was he just basically said any transgender person employed by the US military is out on the rear. To which I said, well, yeah, that makes sense if you're talking about frontline divisions, if you're talking about soldiers who actually have to go into battle and engage the enemy. I'm not sure it makes sense if you're talking about somebody who works in administration, or somebody whose job is to sit in a trailer somewhere in Georgia and fly a drone over Afghanistan and drop bombs on goats. which, it was too wide. And I think the problem is when you're governing, and you will know this, and we'll talk about this later in the context, Laura, of the UK and the Human Rights Act. Lots of these executive orders and executive actions Donald Trump takes will be challenged in the courts, and whether they'll stand up largely depends on whether they're legally defensible or whether it is just broad-based discrimination. So it's not discrimination on the basis of fitness to engage in combat, which it would be for the frontline troops. It's discrimination on the basis of, we don't like that you're transgender. And I think he may have a difficulty getting past that past at least a number of the courts, which will at minimum slow down the policy and may well overturn it. So that was my objection.
Well, I mean, I think I haven't seen the details, obviously, of the final executive order, but I don't think the transgender troops actually that are in the army have been, any of them have been released yet. So you could say you won on that. But I think they're certainly banning any future recruitment. I mean, everything is challenged in the courts over there. I mean, the ACLU just challenge everything, and they always choose the most liberal circuit. But clearly, most of it will end up in the Supreme Court, which lean right, and you'd expect them to win on most of this stuff. But I mean, the general course of travel is obviously all favourable. But it's true in that all of this should be passed by Congress. That the Republicans hold Congress and the Senate. So the executive orders are obviously helpful, but unless they're passed by Congress eventually and made law, they will be overturned in the next Democratic administration, whether it's 4 years or 8 years. So that needs to be done. There shouldn't be any heel dragging from Republicans in the House on that.
When I say this stuff, the Trump fans in our listenership and our viewership describe me as having Trump derangement syndrome, and I think you just made the point perfectly. Like, in executive orders, as you say, what's done with a pen can be undone with a pen. And if you've got majorities in both houses of Congress, let's see what actually laws he passes. But I think more than getting into the weeds for an Irish audience of how sort of the laws are passed in the US, I mean, culturally, I just think this is a big moment, because like when the US sneezes, the rest of the world catches the plague. I mean, they've basically, to borrow a line from Father Ted, invented modern gayness. They invented sort of globalization. They invented what we might call as cancel culture. They invented a lot of this stuff that there's a global backlash against. And I think it's very significant that you've now got the President of the United States essentially leading a very public charge against a lot of the cultural exports of his own country over the last 30 years. And I wonder what the consequences of that will be.
Well, I mean, you would hope it would spread. I mean, look, that is true. Obviously, America have a huge amount of influence. I mean, I object strongly in a way to the amount of cultural influence America has. I'm always giving out to my children, they watch far too much American TV because it's all on Netflix, which we previously didn't have, but now we have. So Young Sheldon is the thing that they watch right now, which actually is a very good program. But it's all Americana. There's far too much of it. But I mean, it was ridiculous that half of this stuff was adopted by either Britain or the UK. I mean, the fact that the UK or Ireland. The whole George Floyd thing jumping over the water was just completely insane. I mean, the police setup over there, obviously the race relations over there are totally different, or quite significantly different in Britain, totally different in Ireland. But I mean, the progressives love oppression. So if somebody can find a couple of blacks down there somewhere in Clonmel, even though they're not descendants of American slaves, and pretend that they're oppressed, RT will find them. So the initial export obviously was ridiculous, and it should have been pointed out at the very beginning. But I mean, once a media hysteria gets going, it's very hard to put that back in the box. Yes, the pushback is necessary. But unfortunately, Ireland will probably be the last. They will be the last to move on this, because unbelievably, the left seem pretty active and have a disproportionate influence over here.
Yes, I should mention that, Laura, and I mentioned it at the start, but you came back from the UK in the last 18 months to 2 years, where you lived for a long time, basically since you went to Cambridge and proved yourself much more intelligent than the likes of me, who barely scraped through Trinity. But you came back, you actually spent lockdown in the UK, so I don't even know if you know about the fact that during here in the smack bang in the middle of lockdown, the only people who were allowed an exemption were basically the Black Lives Matter protesters who were allowed to have a massive protest in Dublin, and no one seemed to give a shit. When everyone else broke it, it was kind of slated. So yeah, the dominance of American cultural leftism here has been, I think it kind of peaked around 2021, 2022, to be honest, and it's kind of starting to wane, but it's enormous, as you probably now know.
Well, I mean, it seeps over from the universities, and most of these like incredibly radical and clearly ridiculous ideas initially probably came out were just hidden away in some left-wing women's department in Seattle, where it's fine once it stays there. The problem is that it spread so quickly now between Hollywood entertainment. It spreads through the culture, it spreads through TV and movies. Then it's picked up by the media that are looking for the latest thing that they can push. They're always pushing the envelope, and then the politicians eventually think that this is a runner, and then you find that suddenly it's in the Oireachtas. So it's gone from the women's department in Seattle down to the Oireachtas, which is obviously ludicrous. But this is the problem you have with mass media now. Everything, even the worst ideas, it seems to spread very, very quickly.
And of course, the other thing Trump did this week, which I think is relevant to this, is just about the spread of ideas, because he's basically nobbled USAID, which is, and theoretically, the United States Agency for International Development, which theoretically is supposed to fund sort of development in the third world, but actually turns out was funding diversity, equity and inclusion concerts in Dublin to the tune of 70 grand and various other sort of what you would call woke shit around the planet. So what do you think of this business of Elon Musk basically being given a chainsaw and a bunch of young executioners and being told to go into the federal government in the US and basically kill anything that he finds? That is sort of wasteful.
I mean, it's clearly, it was clearly a gravy train. Given the level of debt they have over there, I'm surprised they have this much money to throw around. I did hear about the 70 grand, but do we know what musical got it? Who got that 70 grand?
Our understanding is that it went to a company called Kilura, which is an events company based out of Kerry, and that it was, we think, for an event in the US Embassy. There was basically, but the only reason we can say that is because the dates match up, right? So perhaps it was delayed funding for something else, but that's the dates match up. Show
just in the US Embassy, it wasn't even for the benefit of the Irish public. We couldn't even go and see it.
Well, look, to be honest with you, I'm glad.
That makes it even worse.
One of the things with this, I was saying to somebody this week, is that people think about these things as kind of always being about spreading the infection of kind of smug left-wingness to the population. Often it's not. Often it's about assembling a whole bunch of people together and punishing them by subjecting them to the spoken word and sort of left-wing sort of feminist poetry, and they all have to stand around and pretend to like it. That's the other thing.
Yeah, that sounds like punishment. But look, I mean, if I was an American taxpayer, I'd be pretty annoyed about it. Look, I mean, I think the chaos at the moment, I mean, people say it's chaos, but really it's just much needed correction. And you'd need probably about 10 years of it. You'd need 2 terms because the Democrats have just run riot and just left-wing culture and in general in the United States. I mean, they're still embedded in the Academy, obviously in Hollywood, in Netflix, all of the entertainment industry, all the popular culture. A lot of the corporations some of them are dumping their DEI policies. So it is going to take a bit more than executive order to roll back on. You're only beginning. You're just touching the madness. There's a lot more to. Yeah, there's a lot more to go through. I mean, a lot more to go through.
I was talking to somebody this week who stopped me on the street, and you know who you are if you're out there. The person who stopped me on the street and was like, "See now, McGurk, your problem is you're against Donald Trump, and you don't see how good look at what he's doing this week. It's great." And my answer to that is, and I really do think it's a pity, because as you said a second ago, we need 8 years of this. Now we're only going to get 4. And we didn't get 4 of it beforehand because, and when I put this to the gentleman who stopped me on the street, he was like, "Yeah, but sure, he was only learning the ropes those 4 years." Exactly. He was learning the ropes those first 4 years. He didn't exactly achieve an awful lot. He lost re-election. Now he's back in. He seems to have a plan to actually shake things up. And I think that's moving in the right direction, and his opening has been a start. But what I really like about what he's done with Elon Musk is the fear he's unleashed. I like the idea of a load of people sitting in these government agencies and universities and other places getting loads and loads of taxpayer money on a gravy train who are now looking over their shoulder to see if they might be next, and now might have to actually start justifying things they're spending money on. And I think, Laura, and you wrote something really interesting this week on your Substack. Laura obviously writes for Gript. She also has a Substack of her own, which you should all read. You wrote something really interesting about Reform UK, where you were like, basically, where is the beef? And I think there's a lot of things that can be learned from what Trump and Musk are doing, which is the first job when you take over these governments, if you're coming from an outsider perspective, wants to bring change, is you've got to instill terror in the institutions. You've got to basically go in and start firing people on day one. And letting them know that the game has changed. Otherwise, they will just block you for 4 years or 5 years. Am I wrong?
Yeah, I mean, I think in terms of contrasting his presidency now compared to the first one, look, I don't think he expected to win the first time. I mean, people say he did, but he didn't. The people around him were very poor. It took them ages to fill various governmental positions. There were loads of Obama holdovers for months and months. He had certain family members around him that were very unhelpful, that are not part of the team now. And the way him losing the last election probably was a good thing, because he's had 4 years to really plan and to put in, much better people this time around than the last time around. So that's why he's been able to move fast, because the team is just so much better. As I said, he got rid of any sort of Biden people quickly. Obviously, I mean, I really like JD Vance. He's just an excellent vice president. You say you only have 4 years, but I mean, you'd like to think Vance will run next. And so you could have 8 years. And then
in this podcast, whether it's you or Sarah, just loves this JD Vance guy, and I don't see it. Okay, I do see it. I'm just jealous.
I mean, he's incredibly smart. He's got an amazing, he is the real deal. He came from a very dysfunctional background. His wife is super smart as well. They met at Harvard. What's not to like? Oh, he obviously converted to Catholicism, lectured people on the hierarchies of loyalty and love during the week. I mean, it's like, he's just...
You like that, did you? Yeah, I like that.
He's just like, what's not to like? Hopefully, nothing bad, like Trump isn't going to get rid of him. Wow. That's always a risk. But I mean,
to admire the Trump administration, if we're going to admire members of the Trump administration for reasons which I suspect may not be entirely related to policy, certainly in the case of Sarah Ryan, I don't know, I'm not going to make that accusation of you, then can I just say that I think the new press secretary is superb. She's wonderful.
She's very young, isn't she? Yeah,
she's very young, but it's more than that. If people think back to his first term when he had Sean Spicer in the job, kind of standing up there, kind of red-faced, angry and shouting, and this girl, she just comes in and she cuts through bullshit like a knife through butter, and that's what you need. And it's just, I think that one appointment for me is a symptom of how they're doing a lot of things better than they were before.
The key Trump. So I'm just looking her up now. Oh no, the key Trump appointment is the chief of staff, Susie Wiles. She knows where the bodies are buried. Everybody rates her. I think she took Florida, or she helped him win Florida first time round. Incredibly effective, and she seems to be able to keep him in line. I think, she's called the Ice Maiden. So sometimes I do find myself asking, what would Susie do? But the point is that he is surrounded by far better people than he was the first time around, because he didn't expect to win. And it was completely chaotic. And the media were still, the media hysteria was the story the first time around. This time around, it's just what Trump is doing. And a lot of the media don't even run the media hysteria thing now. They just go with actually what he's doing and, how many Mexican drug dealers he's going to deport today. So, so far, so good.
Well, I have a theory that they don't do the hysteria. In the first term, it was like if Trump had done what he did today with the sort of transgenders in sports, I think there would have been a whole lot more pearl clutching, particularly in the Irish media. There would have been a lot of kind of like, oh my God, this is terrible. Human rights, we can't do this. It's a retrograde step. He's transphobic. Now I think they just kind of ignore it and skim over it because they're terrified that Irish people might hear it and go, sounds good to me. Speaking of sounds good to me, before we move on and off Trump, we'll kind of do a segue between this last Trump topic and the first Irish topic. What do you think about the plans for the Donald Trump Memorial Casino and Golf Course in Can Yunis?
Is this a joke?
This is the Gaza plan. The Gaza plan.
Yeah, I mean, what's the latest? They tried to walk him back, and he hasn't. He has done a typical Trump now and said, no, like that's the plan. I think that was the latest. Look, I try and stay out of that topic mainly because I'm just not knowledgeable enough about it, and it's so polarized. Well, it's not even polarized over here. It's just everybody's pro Gaza. So I mean, what's the point? It's an interesting plan. It would take him a while because there's a lot of building to do there, and I mean that seriously. I mean, who knows? Who knows what's going to happen there? I mean, I think you probably know more about it than I would.
Yeah,
you like it?
I'm an outlier.
Someone had a great tweet. Someone had a great tweet today. They said that I'm absolutely not wording it right, but they said he's going to solve the Northern Ireland problem by sending all the Protestants and Presbyterians back to Scotland, the remaining Catholics down south, and he's just going to turn the north of Ireland into an amazing resort and golf club. That's going to be the plan there. It was very funny.
Well, somebody might finally clean up Lough Neagh. So, I mean, I welcome that, although I'm not sure. I will say no more. I will get in trouble if I say anything further. And actually, I can take a lot of getting in trouble with the listeners. But yeah, what I was going to say would have gotten me in an awful lot of trouble. The point about Gaza is, like, he keeps saying we're going to get them out and we're going to build, but like, who's going to get them out? I mean, presumably the Israelis are not going to start rounding up loads of millions of people in Gaza and shunting them towards the Egyptian border. And I don't think Donald Trump was going to send American troops in to do it. So who actually persuades them to leave? That's the point there, I think, is the sort of missing flaw in his plan. It's very hard to persuade 1.5 million people to do anything if they don't want to do it, would be my guess. And I think the population is larger than that. So
yes,
we'll see.
Yeah, there are definitely a few flaws in that plan. Yeah.
But I think actually, I'll say this. He's hit on something which I think is true. I'm going to say this, and I don't care if you fight with me,
this
listeners,
in
viewers.
Your piece. Yeah.
He's hit on something which is, he just said the Gaza thing hasn't worked. I mean, he's right about that. It hasn't worked. Now, we can play the blame game for, one of the reasons these conversations become difficult is that everyone talks about history. Oh, they're refugees. And then I say, well, no, they're only refugees because the Arab countries attacked Israel in 1947, and that was the consequence of Israeli security. And you say, no, it's terrible. The reality is you've got 1.5 million people in a little strip surrounded, bordering with a country that they hate and want to fight, but don't have the military capacity to do so. And every time they start one of these fights, the best they can do is an atrocity like October the 7th. That's the best shot they can give it. And then they get blown to smithereens. It's not working. It's not going to work. There's no long-term future there if all these people want to do is fight their neighbour. So some alternative solution has to be found. And I think he's hit on that. I don't think his particular alternative solution is particularly workable, but I think oftentimes Trump says things that point to a larger truth. Yes, I think I'm starting to get why his supporters say take him seriously, not literally. That's all I'm saying.
Yes. Yeah, well, he always goes big at the beginning. We know that.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, yeah, I think I'd rather him build a wall on the southern border.
Are we not taking the piss at this stage with people who haven't had power reconnected for like 3 weeks?
Yeah, I think they're down to 25,000 now. I forget.
It's still a lot of people.
Yeah, it's a lot of people, but I assume these people, look, as I said on my Substack, I obviously have a lot of sympathy for some of them. However, I mean, I hate to plug it. It is actually all there in the Substack. In that, okay. I mean, there were some interesting pieces in the Irish Times about this. So there were, when people say, so there was one guy and he said, the house is free. The house is like an icebox. And then a couple of, he's freezing, which is obviously sad. And then a couple of paragraphs down, he's like, all my food is defrosting in the freezer. And I'm like, well, no, this is a small point. It's a lawyer point. I'm thinking, well, both of those things can't be true. I mean, if your house is an icebox, then your food isn't defrosting. That's, okay, perhaps I was, that's a bit mean. But also just things like, I don't know why you would live in Connemara or, Donegal or really anywhere outside the Pale and not have like a fire of some sort. Now, I have been since told that if you build a house, it's a new build, in the country, you're not allowed to have a chimney or whatever. And I have sympathy for that. But and I get that even if you have a fire, you're still not going to be able to cook and you're not going to be able to, your food will be defrosting in your freezer, etc. But you'll still have one warm room. So I don't understand why you would live in the countryside in Ireland and not have like either a wood burning stove or a fire or whatever. And then there were also other people that were sort of like, oh, the tree fell down on my conservatory. And it was just, I can't. We were getting the floor done, and then I just heard this big bang, and the big, massive, like 30-foot tree fell down. And I thought, well, I mean, I think what's more important than getting your floor done is maybe getting the tree surgeon in and not letting a massive tree grow beside your conservatory. So I just, yes. Obviously, the state should move quicker, but I think if you're going to live that countryside life, you do have to realise that you can't be as dependent on the state as perhaps I would be. I mean, I admit I'm completely dependent. If something went wrong, I wouldn't have a clue what to do. I'm not growing courgettes in my garden, but then I don't live in Galway, so don't be surprised if you live practically in the Atlantic and you lose electricity for a couple of weeks. That's
but there's a couple of things. There's a couple of things here I want to say to you, though. I mean, first of all, as somebody who did live with no power for 4 whole days. I mean, as I said to Sarah in last week's episode, I nearly died. It's not the cold. The cold isn't what gets you. Lack of food isn't what gets you. What gets you is the sheer stultifying boredom of it. I mean, you've no television, you've no internet, your phone doesn't work, you can't talk to anyone, you can't read anything at night because you've no light unless you read by candlelight, and most of your books are on a Kindle anyway, which has run out of battery. That is, I mean, functioning modern life is not possible without electricity. And to me, it is just...
You can read a book. What's wrong with you?
What I said, most of your books that you're reading are on your Kindle. I mean, I got these ones behind me, but they're...
Well, whose fault is that? Like, buy a proper book for these moments.
Laura's always on me that I don't read enough books.
Yeah, anyway. You could try Churchill's biography. That's 500 pages. You're not going to get that. You're not going to get through that in a weekend. Then you could follow with Niall Ferguson's Empire or The Pity of War, or Francis Fukuma's basically the end of the nation state. I mean, there's loads you could read. What's wrong? You could even read The Lord of the Rings. Those 3 volumes. That takes ages, especially if you do the appendix.
I like reading relationship issues on Reddit.
Okay, well, I mean, then that's we've located the source of your problem. Then
I wrote something on social media during the week which got a mixed reception, which is where I said that basically if the state electricity company can't reconnect your home within sort of 72 hours, then it should have to pay to install a generator at your home in future for future outages. Because, I mean, my point on this is not actually a self-interested one, because I wouldn't have qualified, I think, under that. I think we were just under the 72 hours, and I wouldn't have qualified for a generator under the spray scheme I was proposing. But, like, the state electricity company has a monopoly, ESB networks or Airgrid or whatever they're called. They've got a monopoly on electricity supply. Their one job they're contracted to do is to make sure that new homes, which are, and by the way, you can say all you want, and I know people will say in the chat, oh, but you build a one-off rural home out in the middle of nowhere, that's on your head. No, it's actually on the county council who signed off on the planning, having considered all of the relative factors, and basically said, yes, you can build that and we can supply it with electricity, and we have a company that's in charge of doing that. And we have a state electricity company that has been found at the first time we've had a major weather event that seriously challenged the integrity of the national grid, has been found to be so poor that we've got 25,000 people without electricity 2 weeks later.
But like, it's not really, they just don't have enough bodies to look, if the wires are above ground, they are going to come down. So your argument is, no, they'd be better, instead of giving people like you who've decided to live in the middle of nowhere individual generators, and we haven't costed that conveniently enough. I mean, maybe it is cheaper. I mean, the obvious option is
I think you should subsidize it with your taxes.
Wires in front. Why would I do that? It's like ridiculous. You know what? You should just live in a city. And this is the thing. People, I have sympathy for people because the government have been pushing this nonsense global warming thing, stealing people's chimneys off them. 1 minute they're saying we're all gonna die, you're gonna be burnt to a crisp, you're gonna be, June and July, like you're gonna be so hot. No, that was never the problem. And last summer was terrible. And I wrote about that as well. No, even if we go on the global warming thing and that the storms are gonna be worse, well, then you're gonna have to work with that. Which either means putting the wires underground. Okay, you can give your generators to these people who like to live in, the middle of nowhere if that's what you really want to spend your money on. You can do the solar panels. I mean, this wind, the wind. I mean, can we just put to bed now the whole wind farm thing? This is obviously a very, very foolish idea. Someone somewhere is making a lot of money out of these wind farms that have to be turned off in the middle of the storm, in the middle of the breeze, basically. So, again, the government have basically probably been wrong in most of what they proposed. So I certainly wouldn't trust them on whatever their latest proposals are. I mean, you should live in a high density city, where you don't have to drive to get a carton of milk. Your electricity wires are buried underground, and you're not going to be cut off from civilization, on the first side of a breeze.
But maybe the people who are privileged enough to live in cities and kind of like have access to all these amenities and what have you should pay a tax premium to support those of us who are in the wilderness.
It's more expensive to live in the country. I mean, we know that. And I'd say it does more damage to the environment because you're driving your car every time you run out of a pint of milk. And I forget what the point was. The point was, yes, clearly, I mean, 25,000 people without storm or without electricity is bad. But I mean, these are I forget the terms for it. I mean, these are people who their entire infrastructure has to be rebuilt. There's all the main wires are reconnected, but now they have to reconnect their house to the main bit because all of the trees that they've let grow too high have come down.
Yeah. Well, look, I want to move on to talk about something connected to this, which is that you wrote a piece on Monday for Gript, which is basically about all the people complaining about the lack of women in the cabinet and women in senior ministerial office. And then I noticed that when the Dáil returned on Wednesday, the first thing that Sinn Féin put forward was basically a motion on the Occupied Territories Bill. And it strikes me, Laura, and you wrote a little bit about this, why are our politicians so obsessed with nonsense when we've got 25,000 people without electricity? We've got housing targets that were missed by 10,000 last year. We've got hundreds of people on trolleys. We've got a teacher shortage in schools. And we've got politicians in there waffling about the correct ratio of vaginas to penises in the cabinet. Like, have you any...
Well, these are sort of elite concerns, right? And actually, the Sunday Independent, the Independent have been pushing this line. Actually, I think they did another article on it. But they did a survey on Sunday. I think I saw it tweeted, and of course, the vast majority of people didn't care what the gender makeup of the cabinet was. I mean, nobody cares. Nobody cares apart from Ivana Bacik, the producers in the various TV shows, a couple of journalists at the Independent, and the academics in the women's departments of the various universities. But the 25,000 people without electricity don't care. The farmers don't care. No, I mean, no, like it's just another nonsense issue that most of the other countries have gotten over. But of course, Ireland still hangs on to. I mean, look, sometimes they're good, sometimes they're bad. I mean, you had Liz Truss was the latest Prime Minister over in Britain. How did that turn out? That was great.
I thought it was interesting. I thought there was a fascinating contrast. I thought it was actually a fascinating contrast because all the whinging was going on about women in the cabinet. And then I I don't watch this show. I promise I never watched this show, but I saw a clip doing the rounds on social media of Mary McAleese, the former president.
Oh, yes.
She was on the Late Late Show. Did you see this clip, Laura? And
no, but I saw the lineup for the Late Late Show, and it was her and whoever the other lady is who they're pushing their podcast. I just thought, now that really sums up the legacy media in Ireland now. Like, who, honestly, I mean, because nobody under the age of 50 watches terrestrial TV anymore. Right, but of course, the people who care about what Mary McAleese says, they're giving the audience what they want, the audience of everybody over the age of 50 or 60. I mean, it was beyond parody. I can't remember. I mean, I don't know what she was saying. It was something predictable.
Well, they were on about like how great women are, and women are compassionate, women are kind, blah, blah, blah. And then your former president Mary chips in, apart from Maggie Thatcher, ha, ha, ha. And of course the audience goes, ha, 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 applause for Mary. I was just sitting there thinking, first of all, you say you want more women in the cabinet, but, here's the country's lead feminist literally sneering at a woman who, and I know there'll be some people listening to this who are not fans of Margaret Thatcher, but I think we can all agree, would have eaten Mary McAleese for breakfast, spat her out and crushed the remnants under her heel without a thought in the world. And that's the level we're at. And I was just watching this bullshit, and I was thinking, the problem is RTE really is, it's producing content, and I'm sorry for saying this, for low IQ people. That's what it is.
It's not necessarily, I mean, they're not low IQ people, but they're obviously very mainstream. Look, nobody under the age of 50 watches TV anymore. So there's no point. Some people under the age of 20 or 30 wouldn't even know who Mary McAleese is. So,
they're lucky.
Yeah, they are lucky. So, I mean, they know who their audience is. I mean, they're not going to give them, they're not going to give them anybody who's interesting, because the people who watch the Late Late Show won't have a clue who they are. They might have, a million listeners on their podcast, but, half the people who watch the Late Late Show would have been still without electricity at some point. This
is the thing. I mean, we've got all these problems. I don't know. I presume you didn't see Fatima talking to Helen McEntee during the week, because I know you're busy. But Fatima ran into Helen McEntee during the week and basically...
What, with her car?
What? No, not in her car. No, that would have been expensive for us. I don't think the
bumped into her like in Dublins.
No, ran to her at a press conference. Well, it was technically what you call it.
Ran into her is not the correct phrase. She asked her a question at the press conference.
We don't do grammar Nazism on this podcast, Laura, just FYI.
No, that's just accuracy. It's not Nazism at all. It's just...
But anyway, as you know, as the parent of four, I'm sure, highly capable children, there's a shortage of teachers in the country. They can't get enough teachers to teach the students. And 75% of schools that have actually advertised for teachers haven't received a single application in the last 6 months. That's about the shortages. So Fatima rocks up anyway and says to Minister McEntee, she says, "Oh, you're new in the job, and fair enough. We're giving you a blank slate here. You're new."
Hang on, they gave her education. Sorry, I missed that.
Yes, she's now the Minister for Education. So I don't have any kids, so I'm fine. But I hope you're making preparations. They
wheel her out a lot. They must think she's a very effective communicator. She was Justice, wasn't she? Was she?
She was Justice. Yes. Well,
who is Justice now?
Yes. Jim O'Callaghan is now the Minister for Justice, who I think will be a moderate improvement. And Sarah Ryan thinks will be an amazing improvement.
Right.
But that's because Sarah's an inveterate Fianna Fáiler. At heart, she pretends she's not, but she kind of is. Anyway, so can't get teachers, and we say to Helen McEntee, or Fatima says to Helen McEntee, "This is your first chance. It's your first day in the new job. You're now in charge of education. What do you think we should do about this lack of teachers?" And she says, no word of a lie. What she says is, "Well, I'm aware it's a serious problem, and I'm going to talk to my department about it and come up with proposals with my department and see what can be done." And I'm just sitting there thinking, Laura, and Fatima made this point very well in the video she put out on during the week. Like, if the department had any ideas how to fix this problem of a teacher shortage, it would already be fixed, because they're the civil servants responsible for running the department full time. And it just occurs to me that we have these politicians who never think that they're not actually interested in governing. I mean, if I was appointed minister for, say, health in the morning, the first thing I do is I'd say, "Right, I'm taking this first month. I'm going to visit quietly every major hospital in the country. I'm going to talk to the doctors, I'm going to talk to the administrators, I'm going to talk to the nurses. I'm going to ask them, what is making your job difficult? What are the things that are frustrating you? What are the things that can make you happier in this job to make you more productive? I'd write them down and then I go back to my civil servants and go, I want to fix this thing. We're going to have fewer bullshit meetings, fewer paperwork.
That would take a month, you just said.
I think if you want to do it properly, it would take a month, but a month's not a long time in the context. So how long has Helen
McEntee been in her... Well, give Helen McEntee a month then.
But my point is, she's made no indication that she's going to do this. She said, I'm going to go and talk to my departmental officials. That's what she said. And I mean, her record of justice would suggest that's exactly what she did.
Right, what should she have said then?
She said she
down to St. Mary's and see what the kids are at.
Yeah, I think she should have said, look, I need to go and meet with principals and find out what the issues are. I mean, I could tell her because I know a lot of teachers what a lot of the issues are.
Well, what are they?
For example, the running of parent-teacher meetings after a long day in the middle of the week.
So we should run the parent-teachers meeting during the school day. So all the parents take time off work to go and see whether or not, Emma can add 2 and 2. Is that a joke? That's your proposal?
Let's take the parents out of it. When the kids go home from school, they're already in your care. Teachers, and full disclosure, viewers know I'm married to a teacher, so I know this. And I'm not speaking on her behalf. I want to emphasize this. These are not her complaints. These are just observations of my own. When the kids go home, they have to do I think it's 7 or 8 hours of meetings every month, which are, of course, sometimes productive, but a lot of the time.
What time, just back up the truck there though, what time do the kids go home at? Actually, I'm going to write this down.
I think it's about 10 to 4 every evening in post-primary.
That's in secondary school though, right? Because I can tell you
primary school, but I'm talking about primary schools. Anyway, the point is...
So primary school, no, because the details matter. So the kids finish about 3 p.m. in primary school, and you're telling me how many extra hours a month do the teachers have?
But it's not the extra hours. That's not what you're getting. No, Laura, let me make the point before you rebuttal. Okay. It is not the time. No one is arguing that teachers have to put in hours and hours and hours. But the point is that a lot of it, I mean, the reason the Croke Park hours, for example, exist is that during the recession, during the crash, the government decided we want to make the public sector more efficient. So how do you make the public sector more efficient on paper? Well, what you do is you take the total hours worked by the total amount of pay, and you say we're now getting more hours per euro of pay. How do you do that? You pile more hours onto people. Do you actually think through what those hours are for? No, you don't. So you just basically say, you guys are going to have a meeting for 3 hours to discuss how things are going in your school, and you're going to do that twice a month. And a lot of the time, it is absolutely soul destroying, and it makes people feel like they're not valued in their work. If I did that in Gript, if I said to my staff, do you know what? I think some of you are skiving off. So what we're going to do is have a mandatory 3-hour meeting every Wednesday evening where we sit around and we discuss how things are going. I think I would make, working for me much more unattractive overnight. And I think that would ultimately affect my ability to get staff and retain staff. That's the point I'm making.
Okay, but so what's your plan to fix the teacher shortage?
But just that. I mean, can we identify the things that and by the way, this does not only apply to teachers, it also applies to Gardaí. We have a public sector recruitment crisis. Can we identify the things that are turning people off being teachers, nurses, and Gardaí and do something about them?
Well, I would imagine without having to do a survey, and you can do a survey if you want. I mean, ultimately, normally it comes down to money, right? They're not paid enough. Right, teachers they're just not paid enough, and I mean, it linked to that, of course, is a housing crisis, right? Because you could be on a decent salary, but if you can't buy a house with it, well, it's not really, it's all relative, right? And if you have to buy a house so far away from your school, such that it makes the commute really long, then again, that's a massive. I would imagine they're the 3 issues: the commute, you're not able to buy a house, and ultimately pay. Now, I mean, I look, if you really want my opinion, I think teachers genuinely do a great job. In fact, there's probably fewer higher callings than educating the next generation. I genuinely mean that. And they probably overall should be paid more. But I will say, I was in the UK for 20 years, had a lot of experience in the schooling system over there, and their hours are longer and the extra burden on them is more. I'm not,
and as a not I'm not going to say as a result, because I have no evidence of correlation and causation, but their state school system is a lot weaker.
No, it's not.
And there's a lot.
No.
Particularly in inner city and deprived areas. Of course, it is.
No, it's not. I had children in state school over there and in private school. And the standards there are slightly higher. It's not anything going to lose any sleep over. I don't want to be betraying the team. But because of the reforms that Michael Gove pushed through, actually it was the kind of inner city schools that really felt the benefit. Really felt the benefit. And then you had other issues like the Harris chain that came in and free school. So there was a lot of change was pushed through over there. And the pressure, I think, is slightly more because although they do have inspections over here, the Ofsted inspections regime over there is a lot stricter. It does put a lot of pressure on the teachers, which I have mixed feelings about. I can tell you the standards are higher over there. Again, not hugely, but their hours are longer. The school term is longer. The school day is longer. They do probably work slightly harder. But I mean, that's just as a general comparison. But I would have no problem getting teachers to paying teachers more over here. You pay them ultimately what you value them. And if you value educating the next generation properly, then pay the teachers more.
But I agree, and I think there are two problems I'd identify. I mean, the first is the way we do business in this country. So, like, why couldn't we solve the teacher crisis or the absence of teachers by saying we think teaching is undervalued, so we're going to increase the starting salary of teachers by 20 grand a year. We're actually going to give them, you're going to pay you properly, and if you want to come be a teacher, come be a teacher. The reason we couldn't do that is because all the public sector unions would say, what about the nurses? What about the Gardaí? What about the council workers? And you'd have a generalised because we have a political system that is incapable of saying, you know what? No, this is our priority. Teachers are our priority. That's what we need to educate the kids. So that's what we're going to go after. Incapable of doing that. And the second thing is incapable of listening, because I stick to my point. I was talking to a teacher from Galway during the week who was explaining to me about what's called the new. Have you heard of the new common level? In many subjects for junior cert, which is basically when you and I were in school, we both went through the Irish education system. You know, we all did higher level everything, right, or lower level everything, or ordinary level, or if you were challenged, foundation level something. Well, now at junior cert and moving into leaving cert, they're moving towards what's called a common level subject, which is where there is no higher ordinary and foundation level in the subject. What does that mean? It means that you've leveled down. It means that every class moves at the speed of the slowest student in it. It means that you've got kids who are more intelligent, more capable, want to move ahead faster, are sitting there frustrated because they are learning stuff that is very easy for them to learn, but they have to move at the pace of the slower kid near them. And that's not the slower kid's fault. And I'm not saying the slower kid should be penalised for that. I'm saying, but the way we're reforming the curriculum is actually penalising capable children. And that's what teachers are telling me. But Helen McEntee will just have to go to talk to them to hear the same thing and think about what she's doing. But I don't think we have politicians who are interested in governing. That is the point I'm making. I think they're more interested in talking than governing.
Okay, well, I haven't heard of the common level thing, although you're worrying me now, because two of them are in the junior cert cycle, but I think they're still eventually split higher or lower level. All will be revealed.
I don't think it's for every subject yet, but yes, they definitely have moved towards common level at a serious number of subjects. Anyway, let us move on and talk a little bit about sort of your other topic this week, which was, I was reading on your Substack, and you were writing something that Sarah and I never really get into because obviously she is a lawyer and she's a very highly qualified lawyer, but it's not really her area of sort of constitutional law. But you wrote a piece during the week where you were basically saying, look, the UK government is in a situation where on the policy of immigration, the Tories say immigration is too high, Labour says immigration is too high, Reform says immigration is too high. I think even the Lib Dems are like, oh, immigration is kind of almost a bit right, maybe a bit too high. And yet you made the point that no one can actually get rid of people out of that country who don't believe to be there. So can you talk us through why you think that is and how it applies to Ireland?
Well, I mean, then there's the other piece then that I wrote for you guys. Yeah. Oh, you've put me on the spot now. Yeah. Look, basically, the ONS, I think, makes various predictions in relation to population, and the latest prediction over there was that it's going to be close to. I like to have the numbers.
5 million more, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was 5 million more. But what you have to remember over there is that That's net immigration. So they take 10 million, or they're predicting there's going to be an extra 10 million people in the UK, I think, in the next 5 years. 10 million will come in, 5 million will leave. So that gives them obviously an extra 5 million. So it's forecast to go to 72.5 million people by 2032. And I did some, just to put that into perspective, at the end of World War II, or when the population of just England and Wales, so I didn't have the UK, it was just England and Wales, was 37 million. So like you've nearly doubled your population in just about 100 years. So, I mean, you're talking about...
The population explosion is incredible. I was reading somewhere, because you never think, when you think about history and you think countries are basically the same years ago, in the reign of Henry VIII, he of the 6 wives and unsatiable appetites for food and lots of other things, the population of England, which is today about 60 to 70 million, was only about 3 million people.
Yeah, well, I mean, you're going back quite a while.
But even how much population has exploded.
Yeah, I mean, that there are various reasons for that. But I mean, even the thing is that so it took 13 years to get 5 million people between sort of 10 years ago, but you're going to get that extra 5 million now within just a few years later. So the point is, in contrast to here, is that now even Labour and obviously the Conservatives and the Reform have all said these numbers are way too high. It doesn't have to happen. They're predictions. We are going to get the numbers down. And I can tell you now they won't. In fact, what will happen is the ONS will come back a year later and go, oh no, that prediction was wrong. Actually, there's going to be an extra million people. It's going to be maybe 75 million.
There's the Office of
National Statistics.
Yes.
So they'll come back and they'll say, actually, we reckon it's going to be 75 million by 2032. They always revamp up. And as I said, you've got to be careful with the net because, so we left the UK, myself, and so that's 6 people out. Now, if 6 people have gone back over there, that's sort of cancelled out. But you don't know what 6 people you're getting over there. You might get 6 fabulous people, much better than the parents' family, or you might not. And whether that's a fair, cultural and economic switch, as I said, I'll leave for the readers or perhaps listeners to decide. So, but the reason why they will not get the numbers down, and there are similar arguments over here, although slightly different legal system, is because of things like the Human Rights Act and the European Convention for Human Rights, and all the rest of it. In that, the minute you try and get, say, an immigration bill through, there's a current, I think, security bill through, and first of all, you've got to, shorthand, you've got to get it through the government lawyers, who have to anticipate the arguments, and they will say, oh no, you can't do this and you can't do that because we'll be judicially reviewed. And even if you get past the government lawyers and you get past the Labour MPs in Parliament, then there are more lawyers on the other side who will judicially review you and say you cannot get rid of there was a rapist who couldn't have been deported in the UK because he was bisexual. That was the latest.
Yes.
And then
similar case. You reported on a similar case in Ireland where there was a guy. It was from last year. Now it's not a recent case, folks.
That's recent.
You can find
that's recent in legal terms.
When I say recent, I mean it wasn't last week. It was last year. So it was recent in legal terms, not recent in news terms. But just walk us through that, because this is a guy who basically got to stay here because he had a kid.
Yeah, well, what happens is that the child takes the case. So he was an Albanian chap, and he came here illegally. He came to Ireland illegally. He worked illegally, and he ended up getting married to an Irish citizen, and they had a child. Sorry, I'm just trying to get it up here. And they had a child together. And when
you're getting it up, this was after that, because I think this is relevant. This was after the referendum on immigration in 2002.
He has a child, and then he was convicted of quite a serious offence that they describe in a very convoluted way. But essentially, it seems he shot a co-worker 6 times, and he got sentenced for that. And there were some sort of low-level offences, but the department. So you could think the government Department of Justice or Immigration said, right, we're issuing you now with a deportation order. You didn't come here legally. You entered illegally. You worked illegally. You shot someone 6 times. You have temper issues. In short, he is given to disproportionate violent outbursts. So we are going to deport you. And anyway, this went through the court system, and his child, who I think was diagnosed with autism, has certain extra needs. The mother works. So this guy, Mr. Z, our Albanian, is his sole carer. And the child said, well, I have rights under the traditional articles of the Constitution that, ironically, the government tried to get rid of, but also under this new, relatively new Article 42A from 2015, which was the Child's Rights Referendum. I think I wasn't here around the time when this was voted through and put into the Constitution, and I couldn't say what the arguments were around it, but I wonder if any arguments in relation to immigration law were brought up, because the court said that Article 42A is a standalone article and provision, and you have to consider the interests of the children, or the interests of a child, when considering whether to issue a deportation order. It won't trump a deportation order. It's not an automatic bar, but it's something that has to be considered. I forget the exact term, but it has to be. It is a primary consideration. It's not the primary consideration, but it's a primary consideration. So that case, I think they had to send it back to the minister to decide again. So we don't know the very, very final outcome. But I suspect Mr. Z is staying put. I doubt Mr. Z is definitely not going. He's not going on a plane to Albania. That's not
even though the state wanted him out there. And this is where I get into. Sorry, I don't want to get into the legal weeds with you. And I'm not a lawyer, and I'm definitely going to say something that's wrong here. So I'm going to ask you for some grace. But like the point to me is that I'm familiar with some forms of judicial interpretation. And one of them is surely the concept of original intent, which looks to what legislators were saying, what voters were saying at the time that the law was enacted. This is distinct from textualism, which is just what does the text say. But original intent, what do it mean for the law to be? And it is very clear in Ireland, if you're looking at this question, that when the voters had a specific say on the rights of children as it relates to immigration, and the rights of parents to stay here on foot of having a child here if they've no legal right to be here. The voters voted on that in 2006, I think it was, that referendum, and gave an overwhelming answer. And then in the children's rights referendum,
that stripped birth citizenship, didn't it? Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah, that was slightly different to... that is different to this article. I mean, I from my memory, most of this was put to the voters, because it's quite a long. The provisions after Article 42A1 are longer, and it had to do with taking children into care, and being able to place them in foster adoption families, and the public were told that basically you have to get this through, because otherwise we're not able to take these kids into care. That's my vague recognition of it.
Yes, and they ended up with Tusla taking kids into care, and
but you never. I mean, the thing is, once these things go through, you don't. And this is one of the reasons why that last stupid family referendum was killed, because was shut down, was because people did raise the fact that there will be lots of immigration. Appeals. And I remember the government at the time saying, "Oh, no, that's scaremongering. That won't happen if we change the definition of what a family is." But clearly it is. It's already, I mean, the lawyers are already relying on Article 42 in terms of saying children of proposed deportees will have their rights affected, which is true on a factual level. So it was complete nonsense to say the same wouldn't happen with the last proposal that thankfully got defeated.
Yeah, anyway, I think the point here in short is that from me, and I don't know whether I think you'd agree with this, but if I'm putting words in your mouth, then correct me. The point for me is that, winning political power, if you want to change all this stuff, that doesn't cut it anymore. That it's actually, there's this massive legal architecture that if you want to reform the immigration system in any meaningful way, needs to be dismantled. And it's all sorts of European human rights conventions and refugee conventions. And,
I mean, I would imagine it's tougher in Ireland, because actually it's got its own standalone constitution, and then it's also got a huge amount of international obligations, and its immigration law is dictated from Europe, more or less, I think. Whereas in the UK, it would be easier. They would only have to repeal various acts, and ultimately Parliament is sovereign over there. It would be more difficult here, but it's similar. Yeah, it's incredibly difficult to get anything done now because of various. So when politicians come around and say like, "Oh well, we're gonna be able to do all of this, that, and the other," like I wouldn't be. I'd wait a while, see how that turns out. Usually the lawyers have something to say about it.
Well, on that depressing note, we have gone for an hour, and I have thoroughly enjoyed the conversation, even though you're as bad as Sarah Ryan for kicking my ass from time to time. But I hope the listeners have, and the viewers on YouTube, have enjoyed this chat. And thank you so much, Laura, for joining us at short notice. It's been a pleasure to have you, and we shall have you back in future. But until next time, when Sarah joins us again, I've been John McGurk. She's been Laura Perrins. This has been The Week That Really Was. Thank you very much for listening, watching, and otherwise paying attention. And we wish you a very good weekend. Take care.